It's the Believe in Texans podcast brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, if you're watching on YouTube, you can also listen on your favorite podcast provider. If you're listening there, leave a 5-star review and some nice comments. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. And normally I hate doing this because it always feels lazy to me. If all I do is just go through and pick whether the Texans are going to win or lose in each game of the newly released schedule. And yet, I feel absolved from any accusations of laziness because I went through every single week and figured out a reason to respect and or fear or loathe the upcoming opponent. And I'm going to pick my wins and losses, and I'll give you my season prediction at the end because I don't even know what it is right now. Texans are favored in 13 of their games, and on FanDuel right now, if we're going to start off right with the disrespect, FanDuel has the Texans as 1.5-point underdogs at home in week 1 versus the Bills. Bills have changed a whole lot. They got rid of their head coach, and they elevated Joe Brady, the offensive coordinator, to be their head coach. So he's going to be coming in to Reliance Stadium, as it will be renamed in August, and be facing a Texans defense that's going to be bloodthirsty, healthy, hell-bent for, I would say, revenge, but they've turned Josh Allen into mush every time the Texans have faced them there. The one thing that I'm excited about in that first week versus the Bills last year bolstered their defense somewhat in the offseason, but they were one of the worst run defenses in the league last year. Texans' entire theme of the offseason has been making the rushing offense better. So hopefully the Texans don't have to rely on a superhuman effort and forced turnovers, et cetera, by the defense to get a victory here. I trust that Josh Allen, as he typically does in Houston, doesn't have one of his best games. He's had a couple of his worst all-time games in Houston. But I think that the rushing attack, if what it looks like on paper comes to fruition, should be a good day for the Texans. So I feel confident in one of their toughest matchups of the year at home in week 1, saying Texans win that game. Week 2 versus the Bengals, it's not any easier because with Joe Burrow back, obviously the Bengals are going to be better. The Bengals defense, as we all know, was absolutely atrocious last year. 28.9 points per game. That's 30th in the league. They're 382 yards per game. That's 31st in the league. But I'm going to keep it about the run game here. Texans trying to bolster their rushing offense. They traded a hefty draft pick for Dexter Lawrence. The Bengals brought in Dexter Lawrence, the nose tackle. They also added Jonathan Allen and Boye Mafe to their defensive front, bolstered the secondary. Linebackers might be a little bit of a question, but this is what's been the hardest thing for the Texans to handle as an offense at times is big, physical, strong, tough, manly defensive tackles. And Dexter Lawrence is all of those things. I know he didn't have his prime season last year. It wasn't like he was playing at his peak, but he was also coming off of a dislocated elbow. And I think being 2 years removed from that, and then also just having the motivation of playing for a new team, then 100%, yes, that's a big test for the Texans' interior offensive line. If we end up seeing Rutledge at center in the first couple games, this is a big test, like a literally huge test for Keelan Rutledge if he's playing center, a position that's pretty new to him other than a few reps at the Senior Bowl. He'll have his work cut out for him, as will any of the other potential centers. There's 6 guys on the Texans roster right now that have played center either in college or in the NFL, and I feel like any one of them could be competing for that starting center spot. The Bengals is going to be a big test. Joe Burrow, though, is a strength versus a strength. You take the passing defense and the pass rush of the Texans at home, and you pit them up against Joe Burrow and his entire crew of scary receivers. And I think the Texans end up winning that game because of the home field advantage. Move on to week 3 at the Colts, a noon game. We keep it very vanilla here early in the season. And this is the biggest question right now is who's going to be the quarterback for the Colts. Daniel Jones coming off an Achilles tendon tear and might not be back by this point. If I were Shane Steichen and it was a little bit dicey and I'm trying to figure out when am I going to play Daniel Jones, when am I going to debut him in this season, where a guy that really depends on his mobility to be one of his strengths, and when he doesn't have his mobility, he's not nearly as good a quarterback. We saw that last year before his Achilles tendon tear. He was banged up, and he wasn't nearly as effective. The Colts opponents, they start off the Baltimore, Kansas City, then Houston, then Washington. If there's any chance at all that they're still not sure about it, I would rather, if I were Shane Steichen, roll Daniel Jones out versus Washington the next week than Houston. But we'll see. If not him, then it's going to be Riley Leonard or Anthony Richardson. Both those guys scare me because, look, we've seen from both Riley Leonard and then obviously from Anthony Richardson, their ability to hurt the Texans. Riley Leonard played way better against the defense that wasn't at full strength at the end of last year, but still put them in a bind as a mobile quarterback, and we've seen the Texans struggle with that at times, and yet I can't bring myself to find any reason to pick the Colts in that game, even though it's on the road. Texans will still be really fresh and having come off a couple home games with normal rest. Week four, the Cowboys. The Cowboys playing against the Texans at a noon game feels a little weird, other than the fact that the Cowboys are going to get a boatload of national games every year. I'm curious, and I'm sure without looking at their primetime games that there's at least one or two that might have had a little bit more juice to it if it was the Texans early in the season. I'm not upset about it because the Texans have plenty of primetime games. I think the biggest thing about the Cowboys this year is that they've annoyed me because they've acted less dysfunctional. It seems like even their most potentially dysfunctional situation, the George Pickens playing on a franchise tag thing, seems to be no big deal. The Cowboys are going to do what they always do, which is not make a decision on a franchise tag player. But George Pickens seems cool with it. I think he's got enough self-awareness to realize that people have reservations about him because of him reportedly sometimes just being kind of a headache to deal with. The Cowboys defense is another one, much like the Bengals, where they're relying on an influx of talent to just prove that they're a better defense. They don't have to be the best defense in the league. They've got a really good offense on the other side of them. They've just got to be a functional defense. 30.1 points allowed per game last year, 251 passing yards per game, which was the worst passing defense in the league. So they don't need a miracle. They need Rashawn Gary, Jalen Thompson, PJ Locke. They added numbers. Jonathan Ballard. They added a whole bunch of dudes. They drafted Caleb Downs, the new defensive coordinator, that theoretically, if they can just be a passable defense, then that should be a much better football team than they were last year. But home game, Cowboys, NRG/Reliance Stadium. I've got them winning 4 games so far. They start off the season 4-0. I'm already getting out over my skis a little bit. I'm gonna end up looking like a huge homer, but I gotta call them like I see them. Okay, I'm just looking at each week independently. You're 4-0. You're rolling. You go to Nashville to play the Titans Sunday at noon in week 5. They've added Carnell Tate. Your quarterback Cam Ward's not going to be a rookie anymore. Robert Saleh, I respect as a head coach. I think he got railroaded in New York to an extreme degree. I think he's going to take that Titans defense and he's going to make them more like I felt like the Titans defense has underperformed in the last few years. I would watch them on film and I'd say, man, they should be better than this. They should be, especially when they had T'Vondre Sweat, who was traded away, remember, and Jeffrey Simmons in there, that it felt like they should be better. I trust that they will be better with Robert Saleh, and yet this still is unlikely to be a good football team. And there's no way I can choose. I could totally see them, in a classic, letdown game or something like that. I could see it happening. I just can't pick it right here. So here we sit with the Texans 5-0, and this is the best I've felt about a football team in a long time in this fictitious hypothetical world that we're living in 5 weeks into the NFL season. The Jaguars. That's where I might become a little bit less popular. On FanDuel right now, if you're looking for an opportunity, the Texans are 1.5-point underdogs. I've seen in a lot of other places the Texans as 1.5-point favorites in London at 8:30 a.m. Central Time in Week 6. This is the one where it's technically a home game for the Jaguars. The Jaguars are going to have about 25% of the stands of the fans in the stands will be Jaguars fans, but it's not the distinct home field advantage with crowd noise that you get in a typical home game. Both teams have to travel. Yes, the Jaguars are way more accustomed to it because they do it a couple times every single year, and they're 2 evenly matched football teams. I think when I was looking at the Jaguars, who didn't add a whole bunch in the offseason and had a much maligned draft because they overdrafted or reached on pretty much every single one of their players, I'm still waiting to see it play out. I like Liam Cohen as a head coach. I liked him when I saw him in interviews when he was in Tampa and then when he first took over in Jacksonville. Even despite the Duval thing, I think he's done really good things with Trevor Lawrence. By week 6, we're going to start to have a feel for whether that was all just smoke and mirrors and a new quarterback in a new system last year, or whether it was more substantial. Remember, one of the big dynamics last year was how many drops there were early in the season, that Trevor Lawrence was probably playing better than what the stats showed. They brought in Jacoby Myers or traded for Jacoby Myers, and then everything just kind of clicked for him. And I think that improvement is going to be an improvement over what Trevor Lawrence had been previously. What is his ceiling? The fact that this is a London game and things tend to get kind of volatile and random in these London games, I'll go ahead and give the Jaguars a win in this one based on, if anything, just the comfort level of playing in London. Week 7 versus the Giants. Texans don't have a bye week after the London game. They face the Giants at home. And I think the biggest thing you could say about the Giants, beyond Malik Neighbors coming back and being healthy, beyond Jackson Dart being in his second season, beyond anything else, is that they've finally got adult supervision. I think just John Harbaugh's presence and him creating some stability within the organization so far, working pretty well with Joe Shane, I think, and Arvell Reese, who I think can do some real damage for that Giants defense. I think they're going to be a better football team. And that doesn't mean they're going to be like an overall good team, but they're going to be more competitive. This is a game at home at noon on a Sunday. I'm going to go ahead and take the win. Texans are sitting at 6-1. Going into the bye week. So very possibly could be less than that. But in this little exercise, I've got them 6-1. And during the bye, Nick Haley have an opportunity to kind of reflect on what's gone well. What do we need to improve? Where do we need to plug up some holes and seepages and whatever? And I think he did a good job of that last year as the season went along. I think the offensive line stabilized. Part of that was when they eventually, past the midpoint of the season, moved Titus Howard down to guard, and Trent Brown was able to play right tackle. They had more veteran presence on the offensive line. The play calling kind of adjusted for the fact that they had Woody Marks in the backfield. But as long as Montgomery's healthy this year, I think the running game in general, but then also just the weaponry in the backfield and using it to their best skill set, which means Woody Marks is a receiver a lot more. I think these are some things that we'll see by week 8. Week 9 at the Chargers, and this is going to be weird with the Chargers this year. Why? Because they might have a functional offensive line, where last year we saw graphic after graphic of how awful and miserable the Chargers offensive line was, and yet Justin Herbert soldiered on and put in a very respectable performance despite playing behind one of the most haphazard messes that we've seen outside of Houston in a long time. Talking about not last year's Texans offensive line, but previous to that. Look, they stocked up. They get their tackles back healthy, and that's a big deal. They brought in Tyler Biadasz, Cole Strange, Awasika. They drafted Jake Slaughter in the second round. So does he end up starting right away, or if by week 9 he might be starting there? I think between that and Mike McDaniel, regardless of how Mike McDaniel does long-term with the Chargers, we know that he can scheme up a whole bunch of funky stuff that's hard for defenses to catch on to. And we've seen this before. If you think about Andy Reid, before Mahomes got there, Reid would do an awesome job of just tweaking the offense every year, and they would come out and defenses would not know how to handle them until all of a sudden about midway through the season, they'd start to figure out what their trends were, what the gadgetry was. This will be week 9 where maybe you've got a little better feel for Mike McDaniel and what he can do. But this game being on the road and these two teams being pretty even at this point, as I look at them, I would say I'll give the Chargers a win at this one. So the Texans are 6-2, headed into week 10. Oh, at the Browns. All right. I have to tread carefully here because I feel bad for Browns fans. They're long beleaguered and yet loyal Browns fans. and they find themselves in a situation where the Browns defense still is probably going to be really good despite a new defensive coordinator. Myles Garrett and everybody that falls in after him are a very talented defense. Probably one of the best defenses in the league last year, except it didn't even show up statistically because usually by around midway through the third quarter, at some point, the seams break when the defense is trying to hold everything together. The biggest question here is going to be who's playing quarterback, obviously, by week 10. And Sean Pendergast made a good point this morning on Sports Radio 610, which was if Deshaun's playing well, if he's the starting quarterback in week 10, then it probably means that the Browns are a better football team than you expected them to be. If it's a lost season, then it would also probably, by this point, it would also probably mean that Deshaun's not playing all that great, and you're going to have Shedeur Sanders out there. The dynamic of Shedeur Sanders as a second-year player, but still a very young player with not that much experience versus the Texans defense, and the fact that simply the Browns are the Browns until they prove otherwise. I'll give the Texans a win here. I know, ballsy move by me, having the Texans beat the Browns in week 10. Texans sit at 7-2. I'm also intrigued by Todd Monken. I like Todd Monken, if only because I enjoy his interviews. So maybe Todd Monken and Shedeur Sanders can do something long-term. I don't know if it's going to be this year. Week 11 versus the Colts. Thursday night game, 7:15 p.m. I'm going to look in advance a little bit and tell you right off the bat. I usually don't like Thursday night games. I like that this is a Thursday night game because it means that the Texans will have a long week of rest before the Ravens game in week 12. But getting back to week 11, look, this is just as Kalen Bullock said last year. I agree with it as well, that the Colts offense goes as Jonathan Taylor goes. That's really what you have to do. That's what you have to bottle up. And the addition of Caden McDonald, that's going to help in that regard. You bring in Reed Blankenship, who's going to be hopefully an asset, not just in pass defense, but also in run support, not having some of these mental errors that we've had from the rotating cast of characters there in the defensive backfield last year. I haven't looked at this. I did not look at the spread on this beforehand, but I know that the Texans are more heavily favored than I would have expected. And I'm curious, even based on what the spread is from the first matchup of the season, the Texans ended up getting an extra point or two on the spread above and beyond just being at home. And I would agree with that. It's usually, I don't expect Vegas to give us that benefit of the doubt as well. The defensive additions on the Colts defensive side of the ball, it's more quantity than quality at this point. It's nothing right now that makes me shake in my boots. So I'll give the Texans a win. And at this point, they're 8-2, going up to staying at home the next week versus the Ravens. And this is my one request. Look, I'm getting up there. I'm middle-aged, technically past middle-aged. I don't think I'm going to live to be 102 years old. BMI's too high. Too much fun living in my earlier days. So I'm on the back nine of life here. Can the Texans beat Lamar Jackson once before I die? Can you do that for me? And I will not. I am not a superstitious man, but I will not tempt the football gods by picking the Texans in this game until they show to me that they can show up versus a combination of Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. They've taken care of Derrick Henry before. Derrick Henry, some of his worst games have been against Texans defenses. And yet, I'm not going to, I know. I remember back when he was averaging like 200 yards per game, but a couple of his worst games have been versus the Texans since D'Amico got here. But I'll give this one to the Ravens in week 12. So at this point, the Texans are 8-3, going up in potentially cold weather on December 6th to face the Steelers for a Sunday night football game. Aaron Rodgers is back. Nobody really knows why. Other than that, the Steelers just seem to be content to churn along and be a slightly above average football team that can either maybe make a push for the playoffs and make the playoffs and then get smacked down by the Texans in the playoffs, or maybe just have Aaron Rodgers show the best version of himself and then kind of fizzle out down the stretch. If I were a Steelers fan, I would be livid, because if I'm a Steelers fan, I expect greatness and I expect Super Bowls. And I don't think the Texans have done anything, or excuse me, the Steelers have done anything in the last few years, starting with when they were just hanging on to an aging Ben Roethlisberger and then moving on eventually to Russell Wilson and now to Aaron Rodgers. And they bring it back and expect that somehow because Mike McCarthy, who had a dysfunctional relationship with Aaron Rodgers the last time Aaron Rodgers was a good quarterback in 2021, that was the last time. That was the last time Aaron Rodgers had an above-average QBR. Not that QBR is the be-all, end-all, but that matches the eyeball test. And yet here we are. They were a middle-of-the-road offense last year. A lot of that was more based on the rushing attack than on the passing attack. And the Texans win this game in Week 13 versus the Steelers. So we're sitting on 9-3 going into Week 14 at Washington for another potential cold weather game, December 13th at noon. And there's kind of a theme here. If we're looking at the Cowboys, we're looking at the Bengals, we're looking at the Commanders, team whose defense was just god-awful last year. But they get their quarterback back. Now, Joe Burrow coming back is different than Jaden Daniels coming back. Jaden Daniels did some really good things his rookie year a couple years ago with a now fired Cliff Kingsbury. But they have David Blah, first-time offensive coordinator. They rebuilt the defense to try to give him some support in that regard. The 6 of the Commanders' 8 key defensive additions were either linebackers or defensive linemen. I won't read off the entire names, but they also drafted Sonny Styles. They want a faster, more flexible defense that can pressure from different looks. They'll have some film on that, the Texans will, going into that game. But really, a lot of this comes down to, all right, Jaden Daniels, he can do some damage with his feet, but he's also a skinnier guy that I think they're going to really try to bring him along and encourage him not to have to rely on his feet or make big plays that way. He's very, very capable of throwing the football. We know this. There's a lot of unknown here, and the defense might look better on paper, but until I see it, I'm not going to believe it. So I'm just going to go ahead and give the Texans a win on this one. So they sit at 10-3 going into Week 15 versus the Jaguars. This one is not in London. It's not in Jacksonville. It's right here in Houston. And one of the things I saw, you know what I should bring about here? I haven't talked about Travis Hunter. We talked about the Jaguars already, and we didn't talk about Travis Hunter. Travis Hunter reportedly is going to play more on the defensive side of the ball this year, focus more there. The organization has pushed back on that, and it sounds like they at least want Travis Hunter to believe that he's going to be a genuine two-way player. As an opponent of the Jaguars, what I would not want to see is Travis Hunter focusing mostly on defense. I think that's where he can do his most damage. We've seen him make some really nice plays versus the Texans. We saw him with some nice plays as a receiver, but it was a lot of still run after the catch type stuff. Not like that genuine, oh crap, know where this guy is and send 2 guys out to stop him. I see the upside there, but I think right now at this point in his career, he can do his most damage as a defensive back. And what will he be by Week 15? I don't know. This will probably be a battle, but it's at home versus the Jaguars. And when I'm going to take the home field advantage and sit there at 11-4. I think I know where I'm going with this. I know where I'm headed with this season. Week 16, before I get there, I got to face the Eagles in Philadelphia, Christmas Eve, 7:15 p.m. I tried to think of a grudge match dynamic here, and the best I could come up with was Jonathan Grenard. I mean, Jonathan Grenard's already faced the Texans before. He speaks very highly of the Texans. I think any of the people that Jonathan Grenard might not have liked when he was here are probably gone by now. So, does he need to if I were Jonathan Grenard, there would be a little part of me that's like, all right, yeah, Danielle Hunter's awesome and everything, but you guys just flat out pulled off a virtual trade with me. It wasn't a trade, but the Texans let go of Jonathan Grenard and picked up Danielle Hunter. Well, the Vikings picked up Jonathan Grenard, and he's played very well. Wasn't as productive last year, fighting through some injuries. But I think the thing about the Eagles is, look, they've won 11 games. How many years in a row now? 3 years in a row, 4 years in a row. They had that one weird year where they slid off, but they still won 11 games. I think the biggest question for me is that Jeff Stoutland, for the first time in the last 3 head coaches for the Eagles, Jeff Stoutland isn't the offensive line coach. This is my sneaky little hope, is that somehow the tush push, which does require a lot of coaching and precision work to be really good at it. People love to think that it's just a bunch of big guys that just go out there and mash people. I like that without Jeff Stoutland there, maybe they don't coach it as well. and that the Texans added Caden McDonald. And maybe the Texans are one of those rare teams that's able to stop a critical tush-push moment or one of those incredibly annoying 4 tush-push in a row type of situations because they're having such a hard time using it effectively. But it's in Philadelphia. It's on Christmas Eve. It is what it is. I'll give the Eagles the win in this game. We're at 11-4 with just 2 weeks left in the season. Packers. This is a tough one. I'm going to be as objective as possible. I think the Packers offseason really, I think, is a lot like the Rockets last offseason, which is, all right, you've got a good young core, a lot of optimism about that. Micah Parsons should be back, especially by this point. Micah Parsons will probably be a full bore, full go, but they might be better just because they already have the hardest thing to find, which is a good quarterback in Jordan Love. Then they had Javon Hargrave on the inside. So that defense that had fallen off a little bit. Remember 2 years ago, they gave the Texans fits. And I don't think they were that same level last year. This year it could be interesting. And it's still one of the tougher games on the schedule. I'll give the Packers a win there. I'm trying to be as brutally honest as possible. So we end up with 11-5. Going into the final game of the season versus the Titans. At 11-5, I think there's a really good chance that you're still playing for something at the end of the year, unless we see just an incredible breakout by Cam Ward or just an extremely out-of-this-world defensive performance. But by the Titans defense, that's an easy win, and you end up with a 12-5 Texans team. But 12-5 going through this schedule, which based on win totals, this is the 7th toughest schedule in the league. You can watch on my YouTube channel on the Seth Payne Show. I break down exactly why some people are saying the Texans have an easy schedule and other people are saying they have a hard schedule. And it's because one group of people is actually thinking about it more so than people that are just going by last year's record. In a nutshell, look, the Bengals, the Ravens, the Giants, a few of these teams that had bad records last year, it's very likely that they're better this year. So the last year's record doesn't really tell you the whole story about how tough the Texans schedule is. But it's not trying to break the 4-minute mile here or anything. It's a really good football team. All of it, as I must and am contractually pretty much obligated to say every single time, a lot of it comes down to CJ Stroud. Let me give you 17 hot takes about CJ Stroud. I'm not going to do that because I love and respect you. Thank you for watching the Believe in Texans podcast. Again, if you're on YouTube, please like and subscribe. If you made it all the way to the end here, my God. Why would you not subscribe? Wherever you're listening, on Apple, on Spotify, wherever, leave a 5-star review and some nice comments, and I will join you later this week. Thanks to FanDuel for sponsoring the Believe in Texans podcast.